These are the Finlaystone Timber Ponds. They lie not far from Langbank, on the edge of the River Clyde. They date from the mid-18th century, that is, something around 1750, and were still in use up until at least 1914. The purpose of these enclosures was to store uncut timber that had been brought in from North America, Canada and Scandinavia. They had been brought in through Port Glasgow and possibly Gourock. They were stored in the salt water which seasoned them, and they remained here until they were required by the sawmills or the shipyards. The scheduled monument is composed of around 10 rectangular enclosures. They run from the high tide down to the low tide level. This land was owned by the Finlaystone Estate, and they provided them with considerable income in terms of the rental for the use of the area. Though the large enclosures are rectangular, they're subdivided up into square areas, etc. There are corridors or channels running between them, through which the boats could enter. These boats had special opening bows to allow the logs to be unloaded. The logs were each numbered, and they were chained together to form rafts. Although known as ponds, the enclosures were not designed to hold water in. Instead, they were made up of stakes and stabs or posts that allowed the water to flow through. From the corridors or the channels, there were entrances on either side. Occasionally, during very high water, which coincided with storms, some of these rafts would escape out into the River Clyde itself. When this happened, all traffic had to cease on the river until they were removed and safely placed back within the ponds. The peak use of these ponds was the 1830s. From the 1850s there was a steady decline. By 1914 there was very little stored here. By this time the shipyards on the Clyde were not using wood to construct ships. Another reason for the decline in use was that timber increasingly was being brought in that had been pre-cut and seasoning in salt water was no longer necessary. An aerial view of these large rectangular enclosures shows a somewhat random variation in the subdivisions within each one. This probably reflects the changing demand for their use over time. Timber ponds such as these have been found elsewhere in the UK where there's been shipbuilding centres. What's unusual about the ones at Finlaystone is that they survived in such condition and the land they are on has not been developed. The arrangement of the stakes and the posts has resulted in a great deal of sediment being deposited within the enclosures. This has helped to preserve the timber below ground, and even above ground it's quite good condition, considering it's probably up to 250 years old. There are also the remains of timber ponds at Port Glasgow. Here the town's motto reflects the trade, being 3 or 4 times a year visiting the Atlantic with impunity. And on the shield is a sailing ship, a wooden sailing ship. The ponds are easily visible from the road and from the rail, and appear to have caught the imagination of the writers of the TV series Taggart, where a body is found floating trapped within one of the enclosures.